Thank you. No pressure after that introduction. I would like to thank Dollywood for asking me here today, especially Kirstine and Helen. Dollywood is a really important organisation to us. We are recommending the Dollywood work all of the time because they do what we need to be done before our programmes start. We're an independent charity at CLPE, and our prime job is to get the importance of reading and high quality text at the heart of a quality English curriculum in schools. It's all driven by what we know about the practice and provision that enables progress wherever our early readers and writers are. And it's all set up by our 40-year research history into what we know works well in schools. It's so important to speak also after Beanstalk, who do another really important branch of work. We very much focus on the high quality English curriculum in the classrooms, but we know the importance of the parents reading with the family, with the children and families through Dollywood, the volunteers reading in schools with the children as well, that helps to bridge those gaps and make the best quality provision for each and every child. I'm going to be talking, somebody said the P word, phonics word, and I'm going to look at our comms person who's sitting at the back. I'm going to be a little bit controversial this afternoon. I'm just going to watch her face fall as I say that, because I am going to talk about the importance of early reading in schools. And early reading has been taken over in some schools and settings by this top-down approach on phonics. And what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon is how we sow those seeds for early literacy to be a pleasurable experience that allows children to become lifelong readers who read for purpose and pleasure. I'm not going to read these statistics out to you, you can read these for yourselves, but what we know is that we need to focus in our classrooms on teachers having that expertise and that excellent subject knowledge, so that we are not doing things like making the curriculum conflate with the assessment. The curriculum and the assessment are two very different things. I was fortunate enough to see Sarah Hubbard, the head of Ofsted, speak the other week. Fortunate and frustrated, two F words, there's some alliteration, we can start on early on this one. Because she did a talk about how, and it went the wrong way. I've been to a few talks in the last few weeks where I'm getting a little bit fed up of hearing teachers getting bashed. It was a talk about the lack of teacher subject knowledge and expertise, which means teachers are conflating the curriculum and the assessment. It means that we're getting a narrowed curriculum, we're teaching to the test, and we're creating our own social justice issues. That's not the teacher's fault. I'm going to hold my hands up and say that's not the teacher's fault, and we need to turn that around. We need to stop having that focus on the testing so that we are teaching to the test and the curriculum is being narrowed. We need to make sure that we are supporting schools to build a quality English curriculum which has reading for pleasure at the heart of it, and to do that we need to develop teachers' subject knowledge and expertise so that they are the people who are teaching their children, and they are teaching their children in the ways that we know best. If you haven't seen our reading and writing scales at CLPE, please do look those up. Rebecca's got some information on those at our stall at the back. They were developed in the 1980s as the primary language record, and we've since redeveloped them to share with teachers, with schools, with parents, with adult educators, with anyone working on teaching children to read or write and developing readers and writers. They show you, whatever the curriculum, whatever the assessment, what good quality practice is in reading and writing. Most importantly, they help you to identify where readers and writers are at in their current stage of development, but even more important than that, there is a detailed section called the Next Steps section, which talks about the high quality practice and provision that should be happening in schools, in settings, in the home, in any place somebody is learning to read or write or developing as a reader or writer. And that's what's going to influence what I'm going to share with you today about developing that practice. We're an independent charity. I'm not here to sell you stuff. All we're here to do is talk about that quality literacy experience for every child that they do get through the Imagination Library as well. But we're also talking about that deep subject knowledge for every teacher, because we want to close this inequality gap. And this is why we at CLPE do what we do. We know it's important, reading for pleasure, and we know it works. This latest research from the Institute of Education shows that reading for pleasure doesn't just have that impact in outcomes on reading and writing. Yes, we know also that it supports vocabulary development, but if children are confident and competent readers, they can also achieve in all curriculum areas, including maths. This is a huge social justice issue for us. But it's not just about that, it's about personal well-being as well, and we've heard a lot about personal well-being already. We know that we have to develop those attitudes where people who read are happier. We know this. We want it to be a quality of life situation as well. We don't want reading to be that chore experience. If I can recommend a book, because one of the biggest things that we do is book recommendation, I would like to recommend Daisy Hurst's I Do Not Like Books Anymore. Has anybody read this one yet? Please do seek this out. This is the story of Natalie and Alphonse, who you would have seen in Daisy Hurst's earlier book. In this book, Natalie is at school and she starts learning to read. Now, Natalie has come from one of the book-rich homes, like you see, supported by the Imagination Library. She has parents who read to her, talk to her. She gets to school and she's given a decodable text. And she suddenly decides that she doesn't like reading anymore. That's all I'm going to say about that. But by the end of it, she has a very pleasurable school experience where actually, she has a very pleasurable home experience where her mum and her dad support her to write her own stories and read her own books. And what we're going to talk about today, and my end session is going to be about today, is what we do with really good, high-quality books that don't switch our children off reading by tuning too much into the mechanics. I'm never going to say phonics isn't important. I'm a real advocate of phonics, but it can't be at the expense of reading for pleasure. So, we need to think broadly about what's involved in becoming a reader. Where we're sitting at the minute, there's a lot of focus on some of the specific skills and knowledge, like the phonics, but we need to really look, when we're supporting our children in our schools and our classrooms, at what makes that well-rounded reader. Not just to be a reader who can read, but to be that reader who does read, and most importantly, who wants to read and wants to carry on reading. And again, I want to come back to Dolly. Ginny just said, oh, there's been a lot of Dolly today. I have to say, there is never too much of Dolly. And if I haven't convinced either Jeff or Frank to duet with me on Islands in the Stream by the end of the day, I feel I haven't fulfilled my Dollywood experience. But Dolly said that children have to have that book in their heart. And that's important because that's what builds those big shapes of reading. And without the big shapes of reading, the things like the phonics, the grammar, don't make sense to children. They have to come with that book in their heart. They have to have that knowledge of stories and that idea, that predictability to know what's going to happen next. To be able to pick up the patterns of language, to start to help you through the story and help you read. And also to have those real experiences of the world to help them make connections and have those books that live in their hearts, as we've heard about throughout today. Without this, the whole purpose and pleasure of reading is lost before it's even started, and reading does become a chore, and that's not what we want for our children. Yes, the little shapes are important as well, and phonics is a core skill. But it's not just about the mechanics of a synthetic, systematic phonics programme. It's about how our quite complex language in English works. All of the languages that we see have a different spelling system. It's called their orthography. And some languages have a shallow orthography. If you're learning to read in Spanish, in Turkish, in Greek, in German, it's a whole lot easier because they have a shallow orthography where you have one representation for each sound. Our language has one of the most complicated orthographies. And children learning to read in an inconsistent orthography like that is really difficult. And in deep orthographies, that method where children learn that basic alphabetic decoding procedures, they look at whole words, they need to look at whole words, they need to look at spelling patterns within the words, and at the same time, they have to master that sight vocabulary. You do need that frequent experience of looking at familiar words. That makes more sense. And we need to know that in our system and in our orthography, the spelling of words usually impacts on their meaning as well. And we must never lose that search for meaning, because actually the goal of decoding is to find that meaning. We're not just wanting to lift words off the page, we are searching for the meaning, for the pleasure that stories give us. We cannot separate decoding and comprehension, and within all of that, learners need that sense of the rewards that meaning can bring to foster their will and persistence in reading. Because I don't think we should hold back from children that reading is a difficult experience. It is. It's a hard job learning to read, But if they know they need to take risks, if they know they can make mistakes and correct them because they know it's not right, if they're doing that in a really supportive environment that fosters the pleasure, the challenge that reading is, they will succeed. It's about keeping that balanced approach in schools. We have a very top-down pressure from the phonics screening check in year 1 at the minute, and we're seeing curriculum narrowed more and more in the early years. We need to keep that rich curriculum so that children aren't separating decoding and comprehension, and children do get the point that it's not a discrete phonics session. I think that was one of the worst things that came out of the letters and sounds, the idea that this phonics is a discrete session. It's not. Phonics is an integral part of reading and writing. The other worst thing was the tricky words. Why would you call words tricky words? What does that do to children? It says they're tricky, you can't read them. They're just words you can't use phonics strategies for. You have to learn to read them in different ways. What we want to do is to support children to use that phonics, but actually to use the phonics in the mastery of meaning. The UKLA Teaching Reading What the Evidence Says report states that we need to support children in developing that habit of mind that expects the words they decode to make sense. We want to allow them to monitor their own performance for an early stage, and we want them to make corrections when they misread. Words don't exist in isolation, they have to have context. So as well as focusing on those graphophonic cues, children need to know about the syntactic and semantic cues as well, so that they do know when they decode words and it doesn't make sense, they need to try something else. It's also not just about the decoding and comprehension. That's the big pressure in schools at the minute, but sometimes what we're forgetting is that reading is also a matter of identity. We need to have that curriculum where children are being read to, read with, and they are given opportunities to read themselves to someone else. And we have to select those appropriate texts that meet children's specific needs and interests and reflect their own realities. I loved what Ed Miliband was saying this morning about books making us more human, but to recognise that and to build that empathy, we need to see ourselves in the books that we're reading. One of the most important books I ever read when I was a reception teacher myself was this one, Anna Hibiscus' Song by Atanuke, illustrated beautifully by Lauren Tobias. Does everybody know the Anna Hibiscus series? Okay, I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures from this. The most beautiful picture comes near the end of the story, and it's here. And a little girl called Kiana, who was in my reception class, came up to me and hugged me like this when we finished reading this story aloud, and she said to me, "Miss Hacking, thank you for..." Oh, sorry, I have to choke up because it made me choke up when she did it. She said, "Miss Hacking, thank you for reading this book to me. This is the first time I have ever seen my family in a book." She had a white mum and a black dad, and she had never seen a book before that had her reality in it. She could empathise with the character, she could see herself in the story, she wanted to read more because she had a book that meant something to her. So please never forget that when we look at our provision, when we look at our range and breadth of literature that we have in our schools and classrooms, we need to make sure it doesn't just reflect the children we have, but reflect other realities than the children that you have as well, so that we can build that humanity and we can build that empathy. Right, I'm going to get over being choked up now, sorry. We need to know that books do transmit values, they explore our common humanity, and what we need to make sure we know is what is the message when some children aren't there, they're not represented in those books. And Farah Sarouk, who is my wonderful learning programme leader colleague at the CLP, is doing an incredibly important study as part of our organisation currently, called a Reflecting Realities project. She is working to look at where children are reflected in current children's literature and what headlines we can learn about what we need to do to make that better. And what she says is that when a child opens a book and identifies with the protagonist, language, race, ethnicity, culture, landscape or theme, it fills that invisible space that was left unfilled in the pages of other books. So make sure that the children are reflected. Also, make sure that you are being the enabling adults. Frank Smith said this back in 1987, but it's still just as relevant today. It's making sure that we give children that rich experience of literacy before they get to school. It's making sure that they look at language in the environment, that they share books with adults, that they're looking at books and television guides. The television guide now may well be the Sky Plus guide. It's the same thing, but I defy any child to pick out the words Peppa Pig when they're up on that screen. But it is an important thing, and this is where the work of the Imagination Library is so important. Specifically, shared book reading and interactions between caregivers and children which involve drawing attention to print result in those better print awareness skills. We are setting children up to be readers for life. We've also got to make sure that that carries on into our early years settings as well. And that's where the role of the enabling adults come in. We've got to skill up all of our practitioners, both in the early years and any practitioners who are teaching early readers throughout the primary and into secondary years, that they have a really excellent subject knowledge which helps them to look at how readers learn. We need to make sure we know our children really well. We know what that prior experience is that they're bringing with them. We know how to help them to develop and progress. And we know the high quality children's literature that's going to help them get there. We've also got to look at what provision we're giving in our schools and settings. Do we have that strong read aloud culture, reading to children, reading with children, children reading themselves? Do we have that reciprocal talk and dialogue that's so well promoted in the Imagination Library resources? Is that carrying on into our schools? Do we have that print-rich environment that's being built with the children so that they have print around them that they can relate to and recognise? And most importantly, do we give that time and that space for sustained shared thinking around text as well? Because the importance of books and stories is paramount. And as Professor Teresa Kremen says in the latest Oxford report, Closing the Word Gap and Why That Matters, hearing stories exposes children to that wider vocabulary, the range of grammatical structures that they would typically experience in everyday conversation. Rich literary language draws attention to itself, so texts read aloud need to be stretching, with occasional pauses for those discussions and explorations of word meanings. If we're going to get children who are going to succeed in the phonics screening check, in the grammar tests in Year 2 and Year 6, we don't need to do more teaching to the text. We need to build a curriculum that supports that test being very easy when we get there. So that's what we do in our work, and our biggest programme, The Power of Reading, supports schools to build their own quality English curriculum based on a range of high quality texts. We don't set that curriculum for you because we don't believe that a curriculum in Doncaster and the books chosen in Doncaster should or would ever be the same as books chosen in London. Schools need to be the masters of their curriculum. They need to know the books that will support their learners. They need to know the breadth of literature that their learners need, and they need to select those writing outcomes that are going to enable children to make progress. But what we do is give you what we know works about high quality children's literature. So we give you the text selections, we give you teaching resources that are not a scheme, but that show you how to work with the text. We always tell our teachers, this isn't a scheme where we're telling you what to do, we're showing you the way and you're going to lead the children there, because you are the only people who know your children. We cannot plan for the thousands and thousands of children in the country, only you can do that. But I like to think that they're oven-ready resources. You can get them out of the freezer and you've just got to do that last bit of baking. We're there to help you see that happen. And the books are really important. As Kathleen Upbrown says, early years particularly is incredibly important, and the books that children encounter in our early years settings and in our homes, and the books that adults share with children should be, and I love this quote more than any other quote about early reading, the books which lighten the children the flame of the love of literature, which will burn and burn throughout the whole of their lives. When we talk about what makes a high quality text, we think about the characters. Are there protagonists that children can identify with? Are there plots that allow them opportunities to explore dilemmas, challenges, morality, ethics, so that we are building that humanity through reading as well? Are there emotive storylines? Either that they're humorous or something that they can attach to emotionally so that they can have that deeper level of engagement? Do they have that rich language, those powerful illustrations that Kirstine was just talking about, that develop that language and thinking? And is it that text that blurs the lines between reality and the book itself? Is it that experience that you can just lose yourself in and feel what reading for pleasure is really like? So we're gonna. You've done a lot of talk. You've done a lot of listening today. So I'm going to do some practical activities with you to finish off this session, so that you can feel what it's like to do some of the things that we do with our children in the early years. And at the end of my slide, I'm going to show you some photos of what it looks like in action with real children in real classrooms. One of the things that's really important to us at CLPE is that teachers undertaking our long programmes do action research along the way, so that we're not just saying, here's what the research says, here's how that looks in classrooms, but we're asking the teachers themselves, does this work in the current climate, with your current children, and the current pressures that you're facing? And everything we get back goes into our research summary reports, and Rebecca's got some copies of those if you want to see those at the end as well. So we're going to start with one of our activities called Roll on the Wall. Roll on the Wall is a fantastic device for building empathy, for getting you to think from characters' point of views, and for not judging people at face value as well. Normally this would be an outline of this character drawn on a flip chart, and I would draw around it, but I just want you to think about the character that you see in front of you. I want you to think about this character from two dimensions. On the outside, we're going to think about how other people might perceive this character. What do you think about this character as an outsider? And then I want you to think about him from an empathy level. I want you to think, this character, how does this character really feel inside, and how do you know that? So have 30 seconds to talk on your tables about the character you can see before you. Okay, when I said 30 seconds, I literally meant it, because you do have another set of workshops to go to after this. Somebody across the room in your best assembly voice, shout with something that you've thought about this character as an outsider viewing them from the outside.
Vulnerable.
Vulnerable, brilliant. Gosh, if one of my early years children came up with that word, I'd be totally impressed. What gave you vulnerable?
Because we can only see a bit of a brown blob from here. It was in the eyes, it was the 30th sort of...
This is why illustrations matter. Our best illustrators do fantastic things with their illustration. Chris Horton, the illustrator of this book, is a fantastic illustrator. This picture is all in the eyes. You've got that vulnerability. The first thing that our children look at is the face and the facial expression, and that's where they'll get their first vocabulary from. So we've got vulnerability in here. Did anyone have anything different? Yeah.
We thought he looked guilty.
Guilty. Good. What? See, there's no right answer to this. This is the brilliant thing about starting from an illustration and not starting with the words. Everybody's opinion matters, and everybody's opinion is valid. If we had words on there, and if I just read you the story, you'd know exactly how this character felt, and there can only be a right and wrong answer. This kind of dialogic talk around illustrations is what builds children's confidence in having a go and taking a risk that they can then transfer into coming and facing print. So yeah, what gave you guilty rather than vulnerable?
His eyes.
His eyes. What was it about his eyes?
Looking to make sure he hasn't been found out.
That sideways glance, bit of a furtive sideways glance there that says he's been a bit guilty. Okay, anyone else get anything? Yeah, thanks sir. Threatening. Oh, what gave you threatening? Brilliant. We've got three very different emotions now.
Can't tell whether it's smiling or frowning.
No, can't tell whether it's, and this might be a bit of, I'm not assuming anything about you sir, but this might be a bit of personal experience coming through. What if you've had a negative experience with a dog before, and no matter what the eyes is telling you, a dog might be a bit threatening anyway, just because it is a dog. And that's where we've got to use this to learn more about our children and their own experiences and the connections that they bring to a text that we might need to help them unpick as we work through that text as well. Anyone else?
Lugubrious.
Oh, if an early years child ever used that word, I would be really, really impressed. What gave you that?
I think it's the long muzzle, the long slightly down the face.
Yep, it's the long face, mirrored by the long ears. An illustration can say 1,000 words. It's also, has anyone noticed anything about all of the answers that we've just been given?
They're adjectives.
They're adjectives, someone said.
Negative.
Negative. Some of them can be positive or negative. They're all one-word answers. As the enabling adult, we need to be supporting children in developing the talk as well. So as well as asking them the things that you notice about the picture, We want to be thinking about the language that we're hearing and modelling. If we're going to prepare children for that Key Stage 1 curriculum, if we're going to prepare them for the expectations of the grammar test, of the reading and writing test, we need to be using that good quality language with them. So we need to be using those sentence starters like the dog might be, so we're showing them how to be tentative, but also thinking about how we get them to expand on their ideas. We think it is guilty because, so that we're actually modelling in our spoken text structures the kind of language we eventually want to see coming out on the page when children get to writing. Okay, we're going to read a little bit of this story now. This is Oh No George by Chris Parton. Harris is going out. Will you be good, George? Says Harris. Yes, says George. I'll be very good. I hope I'll be good, George thinks. George sees something in the kitchen. Oh, it's cake. I said I'd be good, George thinks, but I love cake. What will George do? What will George do? Talk to your partner on your table. What will George Okay, I don't think you needed to watch The Secret Life for 4-year-olds to know that George is exactly going to eat the cake. Oh no, George! What does George see now? It's cat. I said I'd be good, George thinks, but I love to play with cats. What will George do? What's going to happen over the page? And we say, oh no, George. What have you just done? You've learned about chiming in. You may not be able to access that print, but you know what's going to come. You can chime in. You're beginning to react to that print on the page. What has George seen now? Some lovely soil. I said I'd be good, George thinks, but I love to dig soil. What will George do? Okay, ready? After 3, 1, 2, 3. Oh no, George. Harris is back. Hello, Harris. Great to see you. Okay, let's look at George's body language now. We can come back to our role on the wall. What might we say about George now? Are we using the same words we used last time, or are we using different words?
Naughty boy.
Naughty boy. Anything else we could tell about George? Is he guilty? Now look at his ears. His ears were hanging low. How are his ears now?
They're up. He looks excited.
He looks excited. Now this is the whole learning to read people, learning to read people's emotions. Has everyone seen the new the EEF, Education Endowment Foundation Early Years Literacy document that's come out this week? One of those things is about developing children's self-awareness. We need to be aware of ourselves, we need to be aware of each other, we need to be aware of our own behaviour. Is George aware of his own behaviour here? No, probably not. So, we need to ask ourselves, we need to think about how we're paving that way, how we're looking that we build that rich and varied vocabulary, we have those concrete experiences, we build sophistication in spoken language structures, and then we can hand over to those Key Stage 1 teachers to start to talk about parts of speech and adjectives and all of the words they need to label there. But here, we need to develop that awareness of ourselves, and we do that through drama. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you get up and do drama. But with the children, we would want this to be a very physical thing. We'd want them to get up and be Harris, furtively looking through the door. We'd want them to be excited George. And we'd want them to think, what are the characters thinking? What are the characters saying? How do we get inside the story through the drama as well? Because sometimes there is that rush into written language. There's a lot of pressure on our early years children to get into writing. What we need to we need to remember as experienced practitioners is that writing is a very hard thing to do, and we can't skip any of these stages. We need to make sure children are thinking the right things. We need to make sure that they can say those things to themselves in their inner speech. We then need to work with them on getting that inner speech into an outer speech that makes sense to someone else. And when we know what we want to say, then we can learn to write it down. There's no point at all in helping children just to skip from thought to written. They've got to go through those processes, and drama is a fantastic way to enable them to do that. Okay, we're going to read aloud a little bit more of George now, because I can't leave you without not doing the ending. We've got to see what happens with Harris. Harris is back. Hello, Harris! Great to see you! George! What have you done? You've ruined the place! And how on earth did you eat a whole cake? I said I'd be good, George thinks. I hoped I'd be good, but I wasn't. Now, we had a fantastic experience in a workshop. Is Terry still here from the Scottish Book Trust? There she is. Terry from Scottish Book Trust just did a fantastic bit in the workshop in how to use your voice. That's a really important place to use your voice well, because what do we want to get to? Look at George on this page, he's got his tear. We need to get into that empathy. Reading aloud is the single most important thing you can do as a teacher, but you need to do it well, and you need to practice what you read, and you need to make sure that you're reading it in the right way that delivers that meaning to the children. So now we get a different question. Now, what will George do? Okay, I want you to talk to someone else on your table, and I want you to think about, what will George do now? Okay, what's George going to do now? Somebody throw me out an idea. What is George going to do now? He's going to say sorry. Now, what's a good way to say sorry to a friend? Give them a cuddle. What about if you're feeling a little bit ashamed of what you have done and you don't want to approach them directly? How could you say sorry to someone then? Give them a present.
Make it up to them.
Make it up to them. In what way would you make it up to them?
Bake a cake.
Yeah,
Bake a cake. Yeah, I've eaten the whole cake. I could bake a cake. Anything else we might do? Helen? Give you 5 minutes on there. No, I didn't know if you were answering the question or giving you 5 minutes. That we could write an apology letter, couldn't we? And that's where we as teachers could get in that let's write for purpose and pleasure. As expert teachers, we need to be making sure that we're modelling all the time as well. We need to make sure we're developing our early writers so that they know the sense and the pleasures and the purpose that writing can bring as much as it brings to reading. And we as teachers have a really important role there to be those models of writing, to be writing around children all the time, in the junk modelling area, in the outdoor area, but writing alongside children as well. And we can model a really good letter of advice for George. We can think about what language we need to use. We want to make Harris feel a little bit better. And this is what happens at the end of the book. George says, I'm sorry. George says, I want to give you my favourite toy. And someone at the back is just going, oh. So again, then you can look at characters in different situations. We might have looked at George and had certain perceptions about him at the beginning. Now we might have very different perceptions. We've got to teach children how to grow and how to be humane and how not to judge people on our first face value. It's also really important that when you're reading aloud, you're always rereading as well. So it's not just about reading a book once, it's about reading a book and rereading a book and rereading a book again so that children take that book to their hearts. And again, you can bring this into all kinds of other areas. You could write non-chronological reports about caring for dogs or pets. You can do book talk around it. This is from Aidan Chambers' Tell Me approach. If you haven't seen this, please look up Aidan Chambers' book, Tell Me, The Reading Environment. But this is about opening up to children to get their opinion. What did you like about the book? And more importantly, what did you dislike about the book? Because children aren't going to like every book that you put in front of them. The most darling answers that I've heard from kids in Oh No George is, I didn't like the bit where George cried. From kids in the earliest years, because they can empathise with that tear falling down on his face. Making sure they get the chance to ask questions. Why are we giving kids comprehension exercises with pre-printed questions? Let them ask their own questions. They're the ones they're going to find the answers to. They're the ones that are going to teach them about what they need to go back to the text and find out. And make sure children have those emotional connections and patterns with books as well. They can relate it to things they've seen on TV, in a film, they've experienced in real life with their friends in the playground, and with this book that they've experienced in their own lives as well. Again, go through those things we know that work: puppets, props, story boxes, so that kids have a chance to play and replay stories and own that language. Also, you can put the phonics and spelling in there. There is always ways to link that decoding with text. You can pull out words that children should be able to read by sight, that they should be able to apply phonics rules for, that they might need to look at like interesting in different ways, about breaking words up into bigger chunks. But also look at what you want to see from the children. So this is Trinity Primary Academy nursery class who've done the roll on the wall. They didn't know if he was a cat, a horse or a penguin at the beginning. But they knew he was worried, not happy, sad and lonely. They empathised with that character from the very beginning. They wanted to draw him themselves, and drawing is a really good way in. They wanted to ask the questions, why is George sad? And they wanted to write the letters of advice to him. They actually took these in an envelope to the post box, posted it off to George, and they got a lovely reply back to him as well. And that's where writing's meaningful for children, where they get that immediate audience and purpose. But again, I want to leave with where Ed Miliband took us on that developing empathy and viewpoint. And this was a very, very brilliant setting in Worthing, working with 2- and 3-year-olds, who said by getting to know George and leading into the book through the character, the children felt closer to him and took ownership of the story. And that's what we want for all of our children. It's also making sure that we have really good book knowledge and expertise of children. If children like that book, where can we take them next to develop them as future readers? And again, thinking about that progression, the expectation. We do a whole, probably 2 weeks, 3 weeks teaching work around Oh No George that takes children through a variety of different teaching approaches, leading them. We're calling these writing outcomes. They're not always writing like this. It might be writing like this. It might be writing by drawing. But what can we give children experiences of so that they will enjoy a literacy curriculum, and more importantly, they will own that curriculum for themselves. And I just want to leave you with this quote from Professor Stephen Krashen. This is what's really important to me when we are working with children in homes and in schools. We need to know that readers have better reading ability, they know more vocabulary, they write better, they spell better, they have better control of complex grammatical constructions. In fact, it's impossible to develop high levels of literacy without being a dedicated reader. Dedicated readers rarely have serious problems in reading and writing. The one message I want to give is don't lose your way by the policy that's thrust upon you. Our CEO has a fantastic phrase, which is it's our role to help schools develop that policy with integrity. Never forget the integrity of making a good reader and a good writer. If you want to find out more, our lovely Rebecca is standing at the back on our stall. Go and visit her at any time, or do go to our website, keep in touch with us by email or Twitter. Thank you very much for being active.